Hello, good morning everybody, and welcome to a session on the growing awareness of wellbeing in the workplace. A little bit of housekeeping before we start. The session will last for an hour. There'll be discussion and questions amongst the panelists and from me for most of that, and then at the end there'll be about 10 minutes for questions from the floor. So if you do have questions, if you could keep them in mind and offer them then. We have, I read a statistic the other day that said that we spend 90% of our time indoors. I don't know if that was a strict statistic or just a general one, but it is quite a chilling thought, and especially when we spend most of that time in our workplaces. Today we've got 4 people who, with a great deal of experience and knowledge about this area, about the well-being in the workplace and indoors, and so I'd like to introduce them to you now. The first is Kirsty Angera, who's an ergonomist. Did you pronounce it ergonomist? Ergonomist from Human Scale. If you'd like to come up and take a seat, Kirsty, thank you. We also have Eminem Mehmet, who's the director of WellSpace. And Rebecca Pelling, who's the head of project services at Colliers International. And Mark McKenna, who is the sustainability group leader at Norman Disney and Young. Would you join me in welcoming them to the panel? Thanks. Everybody's mics working?
Hello?
Yep. Yeah, all on?
No? Yes.
Okay. I think we should start right at the very beginning with the idea of facilities managers and property managers. Why are they responsible for the employees' well-being and health in the first place? Is that a bit of a nanny thing to do? Shouldn't they be looking after their own health? Who'd like to start with that?
I will. I don't think that they're necessarily responsible for the health and well-being of people in the building, but I think they're probably responsible for maintaining the upkeep of facilities and other features of the building that support the health and well-being of people in the building.
And we got anything, Mark?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to put it a slightly different way, and that is that designers like ourselves and building managers in the future will have a far bigger role to play in people's health than in healthcare professionals. That is to say that the actions that we take in buildings, and that includes how we operate them, is going to have a far bigger impact on long-term health issues. So I think ultimately, you're right, it's not a responsibility on FMs, but because ultimately you run a building according to what the lease agreement is from the tenant. But there is a greater sense of obligation, I think, to make sure that you provide a space which is as good as it can be.
So my thoughts on this is actually the obligation starts first with the landlord, and we have lots of facilities managers within our business, and I think that the landlord's understanding, either for an existing building or a new building, around the requirement to provide appropriate funding to support the maintenance regime is really important. So yes, the facilities managers have to identify appropriate protocols for maintaining the building and the cash flow required, but I know in lots of instances actually getting the landlord on board, if it's not an institutional or if it's a joint venture, can often be a major problem, particularly in B grade or C grade buildings.
Can I just check, can everybody hear okay? Because up here the levels are quite low, so I just want to check that you can all hear okay over there. And one thing we should have done a bit before we started, which I neglected to do, might take this moment to do that. If you could each one of you in turn introduce yourself a little bit and talk a bit about your area of expertise and what your experience is. Maybe start with Kirsty at the end.
Hi everyone, I'm Kirsty Angera from Human Scale. I'm an ergonomist, studied at Loughborough University in the UK, and I've been in the industry for about 6 or 7 years now. Just recently moved to Sydney 7 months ago, so I'm still very much a newbie. My role is to really build ergonomics programs for our organisations that we work with and for our clients, and that involves health and wellbeing programs as well. Health and wellbeing programs historically have been very much around the fruit bowls, you know, having a physio in the business, a personal trainer, but actually we've kind of forgotten about the individual at the workplace and at the work point. And that's, I think, what our role at Human Scale is to do, is to bring that environment around the work person and make it more comfortable for them.
Thank you.
My name's Emine. I'm from WellSpace, and WellSpace is a consultancy that focuses on creating environments that support health and well-being, and we also certify projects under the Well Building Standard. My background's interior design and project management.
My name's Rebecca Pelling, and I head up project services at Colliers, and our business is predominantly tenant focused. And we have represented in the last couple of months some very large tenants in the media sector, in insurance and in legal. And the reason I'm here is that we get involved very early on in identifying what their brief is. And we normally do this through aligning their business plan for the next 10 to 15 years with a workplace strategy. And then we take that out to the market and with a brief, and then have responses from landlords or leasing agents on premises that will suit our brief. And then we go through a very methodical process on assessing whether those premises meet that brief. And it's a competition. And we see that there are some landlords and developers who are doing exceptional work in understanding tenants' needs on a multifaceted level. And so our assessment is, goes through, is quite comprehensive. And ultimately, what I think landlords and facilities managers need to understand is that a lot of these industries are really being disrupted, and so they're being the battle to retain talent, to maintain profitability. All of these things need to be considered when looking at premises, and staff costs for a typical professional consultancy firm are 70% of their business. So it's an important asset, and they don't want their asset at the end of the day to walk home and not come back to work. So the questions about how well a building will meet their requirements to retain their staff, but also to attract talent, and it's a battle out there, is really, really important, and certainly very much a priority for the clients that we're working with.
Thank you. Mark?
So I'm Mark McKenna. I look after NDY's global sustainability team of consultants, and that's everywhere from London through to Vancouver, and including Australia. And I guess my experience in healthy buildings started about 10 to 15 years ago when, in the UK, as you can probably tell, we were looking at the effects of sick building syndrome from buildings that were operated back in the 60s, 70s and 80s, where the transition from the transition in central heating systems played a large part in essentially moving towards better sealed buildings. And then in the 90s, sort of early 2000s, the term sick building syndrome came up. And that was really a product of essentially sealing buildings with all the bad stuff in it. And I pretty much spent most of my time designing in existing buildings to try and counteract that issue. And that really, since then, has extended into a lot of the work that we're doing in NDY, which is anything from stadiums, hospitals, offices, retail, you name it, and that's health and well-being is always a fundamental part of what we do, and that's partly because we operate in all types of mechanical and all engineering services, so we get a broad range of all the different compartments within a building that influence a good outcome, and yeah, so that's my experience really, and that's why I'm here. I'm keen to share some of the knowledge that we've got on our projects at the moment.
Thank you very much. So you just said there, Mark, that the sick building syndrome became sort of an issue, or recognised as an issue in the 2000s. So for the last 10 years, what are the trends now in workplace design for the consideration of healthy buildings?
I think the ladies here may be able to answer this one better than myself in terms of trends in the workplace, but I think from a building operations point of view, we've had numerous discussions over the last few years with asset managers and facilities managers around energy efficiency, water efficiency, really trying to squeeze as much as you can out of the building, and that was never the best idea, because all you're really doing is you're sacrificing something else. And I think the trend, certainly over the last few years, where we've started to see a lot more empirical data around health and wellness, there's been a recognition that, for example, lowering your fresh air rates in buildings to try and get your energy costs down is not necessarily a good idea. And I think that's the fundamental change. And like I said, that's something that I've understood for a long time, but the introduction of things, mechanisms such as the well building standard, have really helped try and contextualise that in a way that people outside of this group can articulate the benefits to people like facilities managers, owners, leasing agents. So I think that's the major change, which is probably why we're all here.
Emma, you know a bit about the well building standard, don't you? Would you like to talk a bit about that?
Yes, sure. So it's an international building standard, and it focuses exclusively on the health and well-being of people that occupy a space. And it looks at what they call 7 concepts. So air, water, nourishment, light, fitness, comfort, and mind. And it develops, I suppose, an outline, a baseline, a benchmark that organisations can follow and implement into a project so that it does become more supportive of health and well-being. It is very important, as Rebecca said, the number one important thing for an organisation is to attract and retain their staff, but there's also the element of productivity that has to be upheld or even increased. And to do that, you have to really satisfy the growing, increasing demand of the everyday person. And what is that? That is their own wellness and their own well-being. It's a $1 trillion industry, it's a growing industry, and we're all spending a lot more time and money on our health and well-being, and we expect a lot more from a workplace, from our employers. So that's kind of, I think the health and well-being is coming from all different areas. It's coming from the individual, it's coming from HR, and it's also coming from the building industry, the landlords as well, because they're keen to, of course, make their buildings much more attractive to tenants.
And what trends are you seeing in this area, Kirsty?
I think one of the big ones is obviously the sit-stand trend, and clearly because of the media hyping it up a lot. Obviously scientific research telling us that we're sitting for too long during the day and during the week. We actually sit for about 64 average hours per week, which we all know we sit for too long. It's pretty evident from the news articles that we're seeing. Sitting is the new smoking. What's interesting is that actually after 1 hour of sitting, 90% of your fat-burning enzymes stop working. So after 1 hour of sitting, your body basically goes into hibernation mode, and that's when we become very fatigued, and that's when injuries occur much more quickly during the day. And if we're sitting for 64 average of hours per week, that's a lot of sitting and a lot of discomfort that we're suffering with, and we need to kind of solve those issues, and sit-stand is one of those solutions for that. But we are now going from a seated position, which is static, to a standing position, which is static. So actually we're not completely solving the problem with just one product. We need to actually create an environment that offers movement as well.
Like the walking desks?
Exactly.
But can you concentrate properly if you're using a walking desk?
Walking desks, they're a great idea in concept. They allow us to move during the day. But the reality is the error rates are increased, absolutely. When you're writing an email, you're probably going to do a lot more spelling mistakes. You're not going to concentrate as much. So I'm still yet to see some evidence to suggest that it's the best way to go forward.
And also there's the financial implications, because those things aren't cheap, are they?
Absolutely. So a huge cost to organisations, these fad type products. What we really need to do is actually educate people on what they should be doing in that space. Australia is actually very good at designing innovative workplaces, very beautiful workplaces and functional workplaces, but we have kind of forgotten about how to educate people on how to use those spaces. You deliver a project, and then 3 weeks down the line, no one actually knows how to use their chair or how to use the workstation, where to walk to, and that sort of thing. So I think that's what's missing.
And Rebecca, when you're dealing with your clients, what sort of requirements and what sort of things are they asking for in the buildings they're looking at?
I mean, a classic is the end-of-trip facilities now. So, I mean, that's expected. It's, buildings that don't have it don't even make the list. So, for the tech companies that we've been dealing with, The battle they're finding in Sydney is a lot of them had been relocated out to the Macquarie Park, North Ryde area, and we've worked with a large number of tenants where they're actually, and that's in media as well, they're not retaining staff and their turnover is huge. So they are moving back into the city predominantly or closer into the fringe, and because it's about providing their staff with amenity. So to be able to go out to lunch, have a choice, to be able to go shopping, to be able to choose their own gym, all of those things are really important. Also being on public transport. So that's a major consideration. I was just going to talk about one of the other trends that I'd seen, which doesn't get mentioned much, but I think from an engineering perspective has a big impact on wellness, and that's lighting as well. And so I know with one of our clients, actually, and we developed a project we had actually gone out to tender, and then a new CEO came on board. He was from England, and he wasn't happy with the light levels within a typical Australian tenancy. And so we actually took out all of the T5 light fittings and we put in direct, indirect lighting solution. And you see that a lot now in work solutions. So projecting light up on the roof or on the ceiling gives a greater sense of wellness, and it feels lighter. And then just directing light down onto the work point as required. So that's another trend, aside from end-of-trip facilities, looking at really smart, clever lighting solutions that environmentally work really well, but also consider the work point and wellness as well.
And isn't there a trend also for light that changes throughout the day? There's a sort of bluer, cooler light at some point and a warmer light. Do you know about this?
So you're talking about the circadian lighting design. So it's a feature that's in the Well Building Standard, and we all have a natural circadian rhythm which helps us to sleep and switch off, etc. And what that's all about is creating all those natural sort of lighting levels during the day, so that at night we can sleep better, which means that we're less stressed and we're more alert and productive. So yes, that's
I was going to say that technology, essentially where you've got lighting that colour temperature changes throughout the day to try and mimic the different colour temperature outside, that technology has been around for a long time. In a 24-hour security facility with no windows, they've been using that technology for years. But the ladies are right here to point out that lighting is one of the big factors. And what we are finding at the moment is, I think we've really talked about offices at the moment, is we're starting to work on projects where we've got a multitude of different types of buildings and different functions within them. So we're trying to talk to people, say for example, that work a night shift about circadian lighting, when in fact they're never up during the day. So we're trying to discuss how do we try and help their body clock from a lighting perspective in a building which isn't really designed for someone that works night shift. So a call centre, for example.
How do you?
I never really thought that far ahead when you thought you'd ask me that question again. It really depends. You kind of have to, for those type of different functions in a building, you kind of have to accept that by someone taking that choice or that necessity to work a different set of hours, they are naturally out of cycle with the everyone else's body clock. So things like that you have to accept. But where we've tried to aid that type of worker in a building is we've tried to enhance some of the other areas in wellness. So for example, in a building that operates typically 9 to 5, your air conditioning will ramp up and ramp down, and your air change effectiveness will change as well. But we might have a call centre in part of that building, so we need to treat that space as if it's fully operational, which is an out of cycle time in that day. So they have exactly the same conditions as someone during the normal working day would have. So lighting's a tricky one because you can't really take the scenario where you have someone who comes in for the shift at 6 o'clock at night, and they've come in when the light's starting to die down a bit. You've got the orangey sort of tones, lower colour temperature, and then you give them a blast at 2000K high intensity, high colour temperature lighting. That's good, but it's good for the working environment, but it just means that the crash from when they go home is even greater. So I don't think me or anyone else has really solved that issue of someone who's out of cycle in terms of the circadian rhythm.
That's clearly something to be worked on. And in the same regard, what are the future trends that we might expect to see in the near future? What's coming up? What are the big issues going to be with interior wellness?
Well, certainly from an engineering perspective, one of the things that in facilities is going to be a big challenge is the idea that people no longer want a building, they no longer want a car, they want an experience, and they're not willing to necessarily buy it, but they'll rent it. So people want to know what experience they have in their building, which means they want data. And if a building isn't in a position to give them access to that data, because what they want to know is they want to know how their immediate environment is affecting their experience. And when a building can't provide that, they're going to start to generate their own data. And we can already see that from wearables, app technology, that sort of thing, where you as a user are in control at least of, or you're aware, or at least of your environment around you, and that puts then greater pressure on facilities management. So I think that's probably one of the biggest changes. But I also think in a world where a lot of people want different things and increased flexibility in the spaces and buildings that they have, that's going to put an even bigger pressure on facilities management to make sure that while everyone gets the user comfort, good health experience, the building is still operating efficiently. So if you imagine that you give, how many people would vote to give the user complete control of a building? You just wouldn't do that, but that's what they're asking for. To try and give that, but also to try and run the building efficiently is probably going to get even more challenging, I think, even with automation, I think.
Kirsty?
I think I agree. We're going to see a lot of sensors around the office as well, actually measuring people's movement patterns around the office, working patterns, how they collaborate. Are they in meeting rooms more often, or are they on those sofas, the breakout areas, or are they actually just at the bog standard chair and desk working at a computer? What are we going to see? And that's, I think, what we're going to see much more often. And in the last couple of years, we've seen this activity-based working trend come about. And I think there's now data to suggest that in some areas or some businesses, it may not be as effective. And we've taken a lot of control out of people's working life. You now come into a desk that you may not be 3 hours later, and you're not allowed to put the photo of your family on there or your little trinket on your desk anymore. I think potentially in the next couple of years, we're actually going to go back to that individualized and making an experience for you as well.
I agree with Kirsty on that, and I also believe that there's going to be more flexibility. People are going to look for more flexibility. The line between home and work is so blurred right now, and I think that next few years it will probably be more so. So there's going to be more demand for flexible working conditions, flexible spaces, etc.
Rebecca?
I don't see there being a movement away from agile or activity-based working at the moment, and that's just because when we crunch the numbers with the CEOs and the CFOs, we're not seeing that trend. They certainly want to sweat the assets harder, and they are aware that their staff are asking for more flexibility, so they don't want to assign a work point to somebody that might have a one-day from work home policy or returning part-time. So I think employers are trying to be more agile in the correct term about providing employment that suits people's family life but also suits theirs. But in response to that, having a defined work point that isn't utilised 100% of the time doesn't make much sense to them. So I think that's the battle that organisations have.
I like to change. Everyone's got a term for everything. The ABW is derived from the banks, and it works really well for them, and that's great. But EBW is the next term, which is environment-based working, and that is people will work where they choose, depending on how comfortable they feel. So if it's warmer somewhere, that's where they sit. If they want a quiet space, they sit in a quiet space, and it's because it's all about their environment. And I think you can achieve that with an ABW type scenario where there's a lot of flexibility in a space.
I think we just have to be mindful of people's productivity in these spaces, because giving people collaborative spaces, I absolutely agree, creates movement, and it's a great space. I work in an activity-based working space. I love it, but if you're not educated on how to use that space correctly, actually the costs of lost productivity far outweigh you saving on the building costs and that kind of thing. So I think it's just aspect of education that needs to be added as part of that.
What, people nodding off on the couches?
That's it. Yeah.
On a really prosaic level, how are facilities managers supposed to get around all this? What sort of education can they get to help them help their workers? I mean, it seems a whole new area that traditionally wasn't their remit, if you like, and they sort of had to know how to work the air conditioning and make sure the lifts are working and everything. And this is a whole different level. So what sort of opportunities are there out there for them to get themselves educated and to look after this area?
They've got a quick rebuttal straight off, because as you know, buildings have to be maintained to various set points according to the lease conditions, certainly in commercial buildings. So you provide a dry bulb temperature range of 21 to 24 degrees, and in the minute it's not exactly what that person wants, they're on the phone or they put in a service desk request and say, I'm not comfortable. And it's probably because they're sitting under a grill or something like that. So the quick rebuttal from the facilities manager can be, well, we've actually actively chosen a space that has a range of comfort requirements, and you can actually choose where you like to sit. So in a sense, they've got a bit more behind them to say the building doesn't operate for one type of person consistently throughout the entire day. So that works in their favour, I think.
What I've seen in the last couple of years is it's gone from being somebody sitting in a back office in the dungeons to having to be at the ground floor level. There's a lot more, the end of trip facilities, the concierge experience, the dry cleaning, all of those things that are taking place. So the activation of the common area within the building, and I think our facilities management is now being very much part of that over and above all of the base building services maintenance. But what we are seeing as another trend, and we are doing it within our own business, is that is taking concierge services in-house to tenants. So large tenants that want to have their staff feeling valued are having their own internal concierge experience. So managing, their dry cleaning, setting up meeting rooms for them, showing them how to use software, training them is a big part of what big organisations, so banking and some of the sort of top three accounting firms are doing. And that's really taking it in-house and owning responsibility for that, not necessarily passing it back through to the facilities management. So tenant-side concierge services, but at a really sort of more sophisticated level.
What are the implications for facilities and managers? I mean, you've talked, Rebecca, about talent attraction and retention, but what are the other implications if these areas are neglected and if wellness isn't properly looked after in the workplace?
You lose tenants. Sydney's changed. It's changed from being a tenant market to more of a landlord market at the moment because of there's a reduction in the square metres of tenancy space. But the process that we follow is, going to the market, having a brief, evaluating buildings against each other, and doing it very comprehensively means that you won't be able to get the rental returns, and or the tenants will go elsewhere. So I think it affects landlords' bottom dollar by not maintaining their buildings and being contemporary with what tenants are looking for.
And do you have anything to add to that, Emily?
I agree with that. Yeah, you definitely will lose tenants, and there's an opportunity for marketing for landlords if they do have a building that is supports health and wellbeing. So I think that's an opportunity that most of them seem to be taking up at the moment.
And on a very specific physical sense, what happens to people that aren't? What do people with sick building syndrome look like? I mean,
not well. They probably don't sleep well.
Yeah.
They probably have headaches. They might suffer some sort of allergies. Anxiety, stress, all those sorts of things. It's not nice. I've recently been affected by mould, so I have first-hand experience of what that can be like, and it's not nice at all.
What happened?
Gosh, well, apart from the kind of not being able to breathe properly and not having full lung capacity, and my brain I wasn't able to focus. It was affecting my brain. I couldn't sleep. What else? Digestive issues, body not digesting, all sorts of allergies to all sorts of foods that I would normally eat and all of a sudden can't. And Yeah, it was interesting experience, considering, and ironic considering what I actually do.
Was it in a workplace?
No, it was actually at home.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I don't know if any of you, we were talking earlier, Kirsty, about doing a tour of this building, and downstairs in the basement there's huge issues with condensation, and it smells very musty. I'm wondering, are we in a well building? Does anybody know about ICC?
Well, I was the independent verifier for this building for sustainability, so I'd have to say it's definitely a good space. Look, it's a brand new building. It's going through a lot of teething issues. I mean, if you think how long it took to build this, it takes an awful long time to actually to operate it correctly as well. It'll take 2-3 years to really get this place as it should be. But yeah.
And you had something you were going to say a bit earlier when.
I think it was the question about what's going to happen for facilities managers if you don't provide a well space, and you're absolutely right that I think tenants will leave. A lot of the tenant leasing arrangements, this is in commercial buildings as well, so office, they'll be wrapped into a 12, 24 month or 5, 10, 15-year lease. So I think eventually that is absolutely true, they will. But I think outside of offices, buildings where people will choose to go, so you don't choose to go to work, you have to go. Places where people can choose to go, the impact on those type of buildings will be even greater because it'll be a lot quicker. So if there's I don't know, a restaurant or a cafe or a co-working space that you choose to use, if it's not a great space, then you're just going to stop going. That has an immediate commercial impact on the owner of that space. But I would certainly agree longer term, there will be some rental issues associated with poorer spaces, or not poorer spaces, but just higher expectation in the market generally from what a building should actually give an occupant. That's what I was going to add.
Do you have anything to add to that, Kirsty?
I think certainly in commercial offices there's twofold. There's going to be a lot of costs to lost productivity if you're not giving people a health wellbeing program or creating a well space. It currently costs the US around $60 billion per year from the cost of lost productivity. And that's just people being in discomfort with bad backs, eye strain, that sort of thing. And I think that's what we really need to be mindful of and educate people on how to create a better space for themselves and empower employees to take on that responsibility as well. We can certainly create a space that's well and give you the tools for that, but if you don't use it in the right manner, then it doesn't matter. You need to be educated on that as well, and otherwise you're going to suffer from musculoskeletal disorders, stress, anxiety, which will cost the business and personally for yourself is going to cost you a lot too.
I'd like to.
So I was just going to say that's with the well building standard. The well building standard is about educating people as well. So it does aim to do that passively, and it is about providing information to your employees about what's available to them in the space, what has been implemented, and how it can help them. And it's also about a lot of policy and culture and transparency. That's the responsibility of the organisation occupying the space. So it then hands over the baton to the company within the space to do something for their employees. And of course then it's up to the employees to hopefully take it on.
I thought I might share with you one of our clients, as part of their wellness strategy, they have a bring your animal to work policy, and they're not sitting out at Surrey Hills. They're a major firm that's disrupting the taxi industry, and they're in a commercial tower in George Street, and we did their fit out for them, and I came back to have a look, and there may have been a parrot or two in the office and a puppy dog running around, and I asked how had they managed to do this, and we weren't involved in the lease, but there was no policy or anything, and they're excluding you bringing animals to work, so they found this loophole, developed their own policy, gave it to the facilities manager. Luckily, I understand the facilities managers worked with them, and so there's been no incidents in lifts to date. Apparently, when someone brings their pet in, they will send the lift directly for that passenger with their animal so that nobody else has to share it. And what they were saying was obviously that the people in their office are so much happier and they're responsible pet owners. But yes, there's animals wandering around. We thought maybe not taking a horse to work might be the boundary, but yes, there was a parrot and there's a few puppies. So
you could fit elephants in here, couldn't you? we talked a bit about air quality and light and their importance in a well environment. Something that I was talking about with somebody yesterday was a whole issue of Wi-Fi, which is so rampant everywhere we go. Everybody's so connected. What health implications that has for people in the spaces? Who'd like to?
Yes, it's actually really not good for us, electromagnetic fields, because we also are made up of electricity, so it can disrupt our natural electrical field. And people are getting sick from it and probably don't know about it. But unfortunately, we're kind of stuck with it. You can't get away with it. Even if you switch it off at home, which I do, I don't have my Wi-Fi on at night, and I don't like to have my phone near me either when I sleep. Other people have Wi-Fi and it's in the air, and so I'm curious to see how, as a species, we will actually maybe evolve to be able to adapt to Wi-Fi. I don't know, but it's actually quite dangerous for us.
Do you know if any studies have been done?
There are quite a lot of studies that have been done, probably none that a lot of companies would like you to know about. I don't know about you, but every now and then Telstra will send me a text message reminding me about the electromagnetic fields of my phone and to be careful. So that's their way of, making sure that they're not held responsible if something does happen to me and I try and sue them. So they're really, you might just ignore those and not think about it, but they're little prompts to, just be aware of those sorts of things. That
is this an issue you've covered at all, Mark?
I guess with regards to Wi-Fi, and my experience is that we're always delivering spaces from a technology perspective that are better connected. So that's not really something that directly falls into my area. But I guess one of the things that we notice at the moment in relation to this issue is the concept by where the technology in the home doesn't necessarily translate into the technology in the workplace, and so there's a high expectation for that type of instantaneous experience with Wi-Fi and app technology and work that we just don't have at the moment. But in terms of the health impacts, yeah, I would certainly agree with what's been said, but I don't really have direct experience in that area.
And Rebecca, anything to add to that?
No, I haven't.
Yeah.
I mean, we just see that as far as workplaces go, that the ergonomic aspect's really important, but we see that the future of workplaces is very contingent with technology and advancements in audio-visual and a greater drive for connectivity without necessarily having to travel and having those sort of, as much of an experience as you can remotely. So we definitely see technology will only continue to drive workplace design.
Talking about remotely, what about the impact of commuting? What sort of effects do that have on workers' well-being before they even get to their place of work?
You add another couple of hours now to your sitting time during the day. You wake up in the morning, you sit down and have breakfast, probably a half an hour of sitting. You might be in the car or on the train, another half an hour to an hour of sitting. You come to the office, 8 hours of sitting. You leave the office, another hour of commuting again. So I think the impact is big on your body and your spine, and the musculoskeletal disorders will increase if you don't look after yourself properly. And the way we come to work, are you wearing heels while you're walking for that 45-minute journey to work, or should you be wearing better shoes? Should you be using rucksacks rather than handbags with laptops in them on one shoulder, which can also affect us? I think from an ergonomics perspective, that's something that we need to consider absolutely, because the workplace may well be very well for us and create a well space, but what happens outside of the office can actually affect us in the office environment as well.
Well, and also mental health. I mean, I'm thinking about the stress of commuting. Do you have anything to say about that? Anybody?
There you go.
Well, I do drive. I've recently moved southwest for some unknown reason. I don't know why. There's a lot of wherever you go in Sydney, there's traffic, and there's nothing really you can do about it. So you just really have to try and manage it and put up with it, and try and compensate on the other end by doing some activity. I try and walk as much as I can. I like to live near shops, so I can walk back and forth to the shops or the gym, and try and keep active throughout the day. I try not to sit too long. Jump up and go and, I don't know, for a walk or do something, you know, anything just to get you out of your space as well. Just a couple of minutes out of the office just for a walk does amazing things to you, you know, clears your mind, enables you to refocus, and you do become more productive. You might even be a little bit happier as well. So I highly encourage people to just do that, and I hope that your workplaces are flexible enough that they don't, you know, give you a dirty look when you're walking out the door to do that as well.
I was just going to say, I saw this question come up from yourself before, and I just tried to add it up. So I walk into work, and I walk every day and walk home most times, and that's that. I think it came into it's about 5k a day in addition to everything else, and I think it was when I added it all up, I was walking for 10, the equivalent of 10 days in a year to get to work, and that came to something like 260,000 calories a year, which was I think 88 days worth of calories. So if I just starved myself for 88 days and didn't walk to work, I'd be uneven. So I looked at that and I thought, well, the first thing people would say to me is, well, you walk to work, you live close. I'm like, yeah, but what if you lived an hour away and you just walked half of it? I mean, it's not a big deal, but it has a massive impact. So that's getting to work, and then when you get to work, have walking meetings, which to start with can be a bit hazardous when there's about 10 of you navigating through the office, but you get used to it. And
swing.
yeah, so if you're walking, you're standing, you can actually avoid sitting down for long periods of the day if you try. I mean, there are some issues around productivity, I would grant you, but it seems to work for me. But I think the whole issue of commute is, wind, rain or shine, you should not be taking the car every day. That'll solve a lot of problems.
Kirsty, you studied in Loughborough in England, so my next question is about international standards. Where does Australia sit in its approaches and its current trends and usages compared to the rest of the world?
In terms of the office environments, in terms of design and innovation, Australia is very top of the market across the world. But in terms of ergonomics and the Australian standards, they're 27 years old. And we're currently using these standards and putting these standards in tenders, and you come into a design firm and you say, this is what I want, this is the standards, I want to correlate this to the standard, but the standards suggest that you have to have, for example, a meter depth desk. The standards don't even actually talk about laptops. They don't talk about sit-stand workstations, and we're trying to create offices that are innovative and include technology and help us to move, but the actual Australian standards don't correlate to that. And I think that's the kind of disconnect at the moment. But the reality is I heard from a guy who was actually on the board of the original standards making, and he said that apparently the Australian standards are very unlikely to be updated anytime soon.
Why is that?
I believe that there's two government departments in Australia who kind of have had an argument a couple of times over the last 30 years and are not willing to part ways. One of the departments has the money and the other department has the resources to update the standards. The reality is, though, they're a standard, they're a guideline, they're not actually a legal document. So that's what we need to consider.
And I think what we've seen in our own business is that, 10 years ago, and then with the introduction of a whole lot of rating systems and GBCA, that the design standards have improved, commensurately over the last 10 years. And so industry is taking that up anyway, as irrespective of what's in the standards. So I think that that sort of the GBCA and others will drive, greater standards than what other minimum standards.
And do you see us on a parity with international approaches?
Look, a lot of the, funnily enough, the American firms that we deal with, all it's sort of like a time warp. Sorry, I won't. I'll just say, no, that's not right. I'm thinking about some firms that are maybe in the legal sector, and it's all offices, and so it's like going back in time. So highly petitioned, highly compartmentalised, and so there's definitely a gap between where we are and where America is, and not even understanding, today with buildings that have got active or passive chilled beams, etc. They don't work well with compartmentalised spaces. So we're really challenged when we're dealing with that sort of American firm that is very traditional and hasn't progressed. But then you deal with a a Microsoft, who we're currently doing work for, that's a totally different experience. So
Or Scandinavian companies. One tends to think that they're pretty ahead of the curve with this stuff.
I think issues are different everywhere you go. So, in projects where we are working in Asia, air quality is massive, as you would expect. I mean, they sell air, fresh air by the can. So, that's a good indicator of what the situation's like. So, in that case, so hospital healthcare facility led level filtration of incoming air to buildings is a massive driver. Here in Australia, I think on our Australian projects there is a level of assumption that our air and our water is already brilliant, so we don't have to worry about it, which is actually not entirely correct either. Although it is far better than a lot of other places. So things like water quality that we would assume is of increasingly high standard, depending on which state you go to, actually wouldn't pass well standards. And again, similarly for lighting, I think there's a big difference between the UK and even Australia, where typically lighting levels in offices are lower in the UK than here. So it really just depends where you go and which type of building and what sector. But I mean, we haven't really talked about nutrition because that's a really interesting, contentious subject. But it really depends. Each geographical location and building sector type has its own issues, I think.
Thank you. We'd like to take a few questions from the floor now, if anybody has any. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? Burning questions? No? Yes, one at the back. Martin.
Thanks very much for the discussion. One thing that I'm quite interested in is the impact of on wellness in the workplace of workers actually getting to and from the office. People commute for maybe a couple of hours, they're driving, they come to the office stressed and all that sort of stuff. I'd really like to hear your comments on that.
I mean, when you're commuting for a couple of hours per day, it absolutely increases the stress levels, and then you come back into the office and you may be in an environment that doesn't help you with those stress levels either. Stress levels can increase your musculoskeletal disorders as well, or the risk of. So if you're stressed, you're more likely to hold your tension in your neck and shoulders as well, which creates headaches, eye strain, and just general feeling of being unwell also.
What I see in my own business with my team and with other clients when we're talking about designing their workspaces is that, I'll often get a text from someone in my team that will say, I've got a huge workload. I've got X, Y, Z to get out. Is it okay if I work from home? And, my answer is always yes. But what the technology that underpins that, it needs to be there. So if you can save time on commuting, and I commute, and I probably work from home one day a week, and that's so that I, don't waste that time, but you need, in order to be able to move away and provide people with flexibility, you need the right technology. So to be able to access, have, software platforms that allow you to dial in remotely, etc.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think one of we tend to like to play around with things in our sustainability group, and working hours is one of them, where we have a number of people that work different hours. So someone will come in, one of our Auckland-based staff, they'll come in for 1 week, 9 to 5, and then the next week they won't come in at all. And that's because he lives 2.5 hours away from Auckland. And so we've actually started to increase that a lot, and a lot of our staff generally come in when it makes sense and when they've got meetings and we all coordinate. And it's not easy to coordinate, but it has a massive difference on people's attitude when they actually get into the office. But I think also the whole concept of 9 to 5 is, it's outdated partly because we all work more than that, but it's also outdated because it assumes that there's a start and a stop when you're in work and when you're finished. And this is a trend that I think we'll see in future, where work-life balance will just become life balance, life admin. And so where you are, how you get to work, when you come to work, I think certainly for our staff anyways, the lines are going to get even more blurred, because what we're finding certainly in this environment too is that a lot of our employees are quite demanding, more so than before, where they were just grateful to have a job. Now we're grateful to have them, and they're starting to say, well, this is how we want to work. So the commute, yeah, I mean, we don't want people coming in, taking 2 hours to get in and being really angry when they get there, because I've got, a pretty short fuse as well. So
can I just maybe follow up a question on that, if you don't mind? So what can facilities managers do, or what can they provide, what facilities can they provide to help those people that are coming into work after a long commute to be more comfortable in the workplace?
one of the things that we had an issue with, as an example, was our end of trip facility. So when it was first installed in our building, it was, everything was timed so that the aircon came on, temporary air came in when we expected people to come in the building, because you had an influx of people coming in at sort of between 7:30 and 8:30 that cycle their walk to work. But then after that period, the system ramps down again, and it's very rigid that way. So if you're providing spaces that allow people to come in and prepare to get ready for work, or to eat somewhere outside of the office space, that are intelligent enough to match the demand of people in that space, that helps. Because assuming that people are only going to be in the end of trip for the first hour in the morning, it doesn't really work. And equally in shared common areas for food, general relaxation, they need to have the same amenity as anyone else that would come in, say, earlier or later in that day. So controllability and optimization of those areas is important for us, I think. I hope that answers the question from me.
Are there any other questions? Hey, it's one over here.
Hello there. My name's Gordon. I'm a security officer, a consultant. Security officers always get the rough end of the stick when it comes to shifts and locations of their workplaces. Patrolmen might get a job where they're a high-rise building, one of their tenants has problems with their security, and they'll send a security guard over to secure the building. But the trouble is, they'll give them a 12-hour shift, and they're sitting in the foyer, no facilities whatsoever. On the concrete floors, that's their seat. Or they'll send them into a small security type hut, where the computer is more important, because they don't want it to get overheated. So they've got the air conditioning on full blast, so you freeze while you're working. And then the facility managers don't even give a rat's really on the workplace of the security personnel. How do facility managers cope with the security, and how do they comply with the health and safety of the workers?
Thank you. Those workers aren't in such obvious positions as the regular office place. How do they deal with that?
Oh, look, I completely agree with you. All the back of house, or traditionally what was called back of house, isn't really back of house anymore. Staff just generally don't have the same type of space that people do up on the floor, and I can only say that the only way to change that is to redesign spaces that provide that equitable environment for everybody. Certainly we've had that instance even in our own office, where our IT guy was in a cubby hole with no windows, and that's just not. How can you get someone that wants to care about their building when they're not feeling what other people are feeling on the floor? So I would agree with you. I don't have an obvious answer other than that spaces should just be better equipped and designed for people that operate the building as well as people that work in it. I think that's the solution, really.
Or it's probably one of those instances where you have to write down and really make a note of each individual issue with the workplace that you're in, and get sort of consistency and from everybody else, and present those to management, so you actually have a leg to stand on, surely.
It sounds like it's very typical that there's a disconnect between whose responsibility is to actually deal with that problem. A facilities manager may not think that that's their responsibility, and actually it may be the HR person that should be involved, or the health and safety individual, or an IT person, or potentially a designer as well. So I think part of the issue is there's a disconnect between teams in the organisation, and we need to get these teams together in one room, listening to the same information at the same time, and educating them on how to create a workspace that's better for them, and everybody should take a part of that responsibility as well.
I think we have time for one more question. There was a gentleman just over here in the brown jacket that...
My comment was, we're surrounded by synthetic materials or man-made materials every day. We can't escape those. And even in the venue here today, I look around and there's a couple of token pot plants and nature around us. It's something that the panel hasn't discussed yet, which intrigues me. Is it seems a fairly obvious thing to surround ourselves with more of nature as part of well-being. Is that something that we're losing, or it's just... Are there financial challenges on businesses because it is potentially seen as a direct cost and they can't associate that with any direct productivity gain or payback? I'd be interested in people's thoughts.
So that would be biophilia, and biophilia is a feature, it's a couple of features in the Well Building Standard. And yes, we are losing touch with nature, and that is actually a really big problem for us. We might not notice it, but we are part of nature, and we do need to feel part of nature. And as we're spending more time in artificial environments, we're getting away from that. So it is important to be surrounded by, in the standard it does say either natural plant life, or it does say elements that replicate plant life. But if you can, definitely, I don't know about the cost. I suppose, yes, there's a cost to having them in the space and maintaining them, but perhaps you can engage your employees to become involved in that as well, which will help each of those employees have a direct connection to nature as well, and would benefit them and their health. And there's also the need, and I think a growing trend, in activating spaces within a building, external spaces that can be accessed by the tenants. And that's a growing trend definitely in Australia, I think.
So my experience is it is an OPEX cost, so planters and planter boxes, and certainly depending on the organisations that I've dealt with, some will choose to go down that path, or some will choose not to, and it's always something that we put to them. There's 2 large tenants that we've been representing recently, and maybe because they are large tenancies, we've been able to negotiate with 2 different developers that we get outdoor terraces that are connected through to, actually 3, that are connected through to the tenant spaces, and they have exclusive use of that. And it's part of the brief that we developed early on was they needed the amenity to be able to connect outdoors and have somewhere to relax, and it's certainly something that we are getting requests for all the time. It's obviously difficult in high-rise towers. Luckily, one of these buildings is just in development phase, and so we've been able to sort of manipulate the stack and the rise to be able to have the tenancy adjacent to an outdoor space, which is a fantastic outcome.
I think in the past, bringing plants and greenery into an office was always an architectural feature, always seen as an architectural feature. But there are proprietary products out there at the moment, which you may or may not have heard of, one of them being Junglify, which is a green wall system. And the benefit of that product is that you can actually push outside air through the substrate, and according to the substrate that you nominate and the plant type, you can reduce Vox coming from outside air. There's actually one in Lendlease's headquarters here in Sydney, which is a great example of that. And there are also companies that so far look to push, for example, kitchen exhaust air through a substrate to get the pollutant levels down to a manageable level, which not only helps with recirculating air and reducing energy costs, but certainly helps the filtration aspect. So I think products like that are really helping us, because as a sustainability consultant, half of what I always try and advocate for gets thrown out when it gets to value management, if I'm lucky. But things like that have a dual purpose, and a credible dual purpose, are really helping us there. And if you do get a chance, some point, the University of Sydney has partnered with Junglify, and they actually have their environmental test lab down there where you can go in and they'll actually show you the product and show you the impacts on a dynamic assessment of the benefits of greenery in your space. So it's a pretty cool product.
And we have to wrap it up there. So thanks everybody for coming, and I hope you'll join me in thanking the panel for their expertise and their insights today.